of them. But everywhere you turned tonight for a solid 2 hours, that was all you saw. State of the Union, the Republican response, and expert analysis. So, yes, we're going in a different direction tonight. Let's not even pretend that Michael Jackson and his legal woes rise to the same level of importance. They don't. But that's what many, if not most of you, have been talking about today. And after you strip away the sleaze, there are still a couple of issues worth talking about. If you have enough money, can you buy your way out of any sort of trouble? That's one way of looking at it. Or if you're visible enough and wealthy enough, do you make such a vulnerable target that the charges alone, the kind of charges that have been leveled against Michael Jackson, are going to leave a terrible smear no matter what happens in court? Did Michael Jackson sexually molest a young boy? We may never know. Because here, as Tom Foreman reports, is how the story played out today.
For months, the rumors and accusations captured headlines worldwide. Never before had so big of a star been accused of so bad of a crime. With a civil lawsuit launched on the heels of the criminal investigations, it seemed certain Michael Jackson would wind up on trial. Then this afternoon, behind the closed doors of a judge's chambers, the drama drew to an abrupt close.
The emotional trauma and strain on the respective parties have caused both parties to reflect on the wisdom of continuing with this litigation. The plaintiff has agreed the lawsuit should be resolved, and it will be dismissed in the near future.
Michael Jackson has maintained his innocence from the beginning of this matter, and now, as this matter will soon be concluded, he still maintains that innocence. The resolution of this case is in no way an admission of guilt by Michael Jackson.
That explanation may have played well in Neverland, Jackson's palatial estate, but in the real world it drew quick fire. Attorney and former prosecutor Raul Felder called it the best justice money can buy.
If you're a poor person, you couldn't do this. A rich person could do it and escapes justice. Terrible message, terrible for young people who are supposed to be the followers of Michael Jackson, terrible for poor people, terrible for everybody. That statue on top of the courthouse should hang its head in shame today that this could happen.
Everyone is presumed to be innocent and totally innocent until they are charged with a crime and then convicted by a jury of their peers.
Up until just a few days ago, Jackson seemed eager to prove his innocence. Now there is widespread debate about how much money he may have paid the boy to simply drop the lawsuit, so he would not have to prove anything. Estimates run from $8 to $40 million. The boy's lawyer would not discuss it.
What he gains is going to remain between me and my client and the court.
But in settling the civil suit, legal analysts say Jackson may have also thwarted the ongoing criminal investigations by buying the silence of the chief witness. Legally, that cannot be done. Any agreement requiring a witness to withhold information about criminal activity would in itself be against the law. But many court watchers say it is unlikely millions of dollars would change hands without at least a tacit agreement for silence.
If the alleged victim in this case refuses to cooperate with the prosecutors, there is no way that the prosecution will seek an indictment, because one cannot get a conviction without the victim himself testifying in the absence of any other evidence of abuse.
The boy's lawyer denies any such deal.
He is allowed to testify against Mr. Jackson in a criminal proceeding. There is no agreement with respect to anything with respect to the criminal proceeding.
Prosecutors say they will take on faith that there has been no agreement in the civil case that will affect the criminal investigation. Still, for a superstar like Michael Jackson, the lack of an open and frank discussion in court of all of the allegations could prove very damaging. Some marketing experts believe Jackson will now have little chance of getting big money product endorsements or concert sponsorships.
I'm not sure that anybody could really afford to take the risk of embracing Michael Jackson as a spokesmodel. I mean, in an ironic way, he's committed the most egregious crime against the audience most likely to be influenced by him. So I don't think anybody could take that risk.
Others think the settlement will make little difference.
I don't think there's going to be much action there for Michael, any more than there was action for him before all this happened. I think his lifestyle was such that he tended to put off advertisers.
I ask all of you to wait and hear the truth before you label or condemn me. Don't treat me like a criminal, because I am innocent.
For the moment, Jackson's fans are giving him mixed reviews.
It's kind of sickening. If he is guilty and he can just buy himself out of his situation, then that just is wrong.
I think it shows guilt. To me, yeah. Why would you pay $40 million if you're innocent?
Yes, he could be guilty, and maybe he's just trying to wipe it under the rug, but I'm not convinced either way.
Still, in the long run, the big question is not whether Michael Jackson is guilty, not whether his career can survive. The question for many critics is, was he able, by virtue of immense wealth, to buy his way out of the legal process? And if so, what kind of justice is that? This is Tom Foreman for Nightline in Los Angeles.
When we come back, we'll be joined by the lawyer for the boy who accused Michael Jackson of sexual assault, by the former district attorney from Los Angeles, and by an attorney experienced in high-profile cases. We'll be back in a moment.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by MCI.
Whose family brought the civil suit against Michael Jackson and is one of the few people who knows the details of the secret settlement. He joins us from our Los Angeles bureau. To help us look at whether this case and its settlement will have any impact on the separate criminal investigations is former Los Angeles District Attorney Ira Reiner. He also joins us from our LA bureau. Raul Felder, a family law attorney, has experience representing celebrities and their spouses in high-profile cases such as this one. He joins us from our New York studios. Now, let me begin, Mr. Feldman, by asking you, I rather suspect we're going to run out of, I won't run out of questions, but you may run out of answers very, very quickly. And so let me, in the spirit of gratitude that you're here at all, ask you why you agreed to come, because there are so many things you're not going to tell me anyway.
Well, I have great respect for you, Ted. What else can I say?
Or you could have written me a nice note, but okay, let's pursue the questions and see how far we can get. Okay. Only about 5 weeks ago, you said there wasn't going to be any settlement in this case, that it was going to go to trial. Now, what made you change your mind, or more to the point, what made your client and his family change their minds?
Well, I think the life of a trial lawyer is to carefully reflect from moment to moment. The one thing about this case is that it changed every minute of every day. It had a life of its own, and as things develop, you reflect, people make offers, you consider them, you reflect upon all the consequences, and you ultimately do what's in the best interest of your client. And when the time came and we reflected and we consulted with all the experts that we needed to consult with, we did what was in the best interest of this little boy. You have said, and we just heard you say it in one of the news clips from earlier today, that this agreement in the civil case does not preclude your young client from testifying in a criminal case, correct? That's correct. If that is so, and if we can take you at your word on that, that indeed he might testify in such a case, you haven't really saved him a great deal of grief, have you? I mean, why not let the case go to trial? Well, I don't control the district attorney. I haven't spoken to the district attorney, and so far we've gone through 6 months, and the district attorney really hasn't indicted or done anything at this point in time. There comes a point in time in everyone's life, and especially a child's life, where you must understand that 6 months in a child's life is an eternity. And given the pressures of the day, it was time to take a step to try to get this behind him. As we talk tonight, I have no idea what the district attorney plans on doing, and we'll just have to take it every single day. And reflect upon what is in this child's best interest when we have to make those decisions. So far, we've done that. We've done what's in this child's best interest. I have no doubt about that. This resolution was in his best interest. And although I'm not at liberty to discuss any of the details, I am very comfortable with the decisions we made, and he has. He's had a lot of courage. He got thrust into the limelight by a leak from the Department of Public Services, who leaked a child's report on the most sensitive issue that you can imagine for an adult, yet alone a young child.
Let me just interrupt you for a moment, because you said a couple of minutes ago that you know, events change, events have evolved, and something happened over the past 5 weeks that caused you and your clients to change the point of view you expressed back then, which was, the hell with any settlement, we're going to go to trial. Now, what was it that changed other than the price?
Well, I can't discuss the terms of the settlement with you, and I wouldn't discuss the terms of the settlement with you for any client, but obviously, whatever the terms are, they became acceptable.
Ira Reiner, just explain the law to us a little bit now in terms of the possibility of a criminal case. If you were still district attorney, would you even bother going through the motions of trying to bring criminal action against Mr. Jackson now?
Ted,
having heard what you've heard here this evening from the boy's lawyer.
Ted, first of all, I have to make a couple of assumptions. And one assumption is, and it may not be accurate, is that the boy ultimately will decide not to testify, not to proceed any further. If that's what he decides, technically it'll have no effect on the criminal case, if there is to be a criminal case filed. But I said technically, because as a practical matter, the impact it'll have is that it'll bring it to an absolute halt. Because there is no way in the world that you can possibly file criminal charges involving a case of this sort, where you have the complaining witness or the alleged victim who refuses to testify. So the willingness of the minor in this case to testify or not testify will be the single critical fact that will determine whether the district attorney's office can even proceed and begin to even think in terms of filing.
Let me ask you to speak for the moment in Mr. Feldman's behalf. If he wants to jump in, I'm sure he will. He really cannot say, no, the boy isn't going to testify, because then it sounds as though his silence has been bought. Therefore, isn't he obliged as the attorney to say, yes, he's perfectly willing to testify if he has to, but when the time comes, I think your suspicions are going to be well-founded that he's not going to want to testify.
Well, Ted, you can't confuse two things which are easy to slide from one to the other. The advice that an attorney may give his client as to what he believes is in that client's interest is one thing, and the attorney can give any advice that he feels competent professionally to give. But what is prohibited as a matter of law is for an attorney to use that as a condition of a settlement. Now, that did not occur in this case. I'm confident of that, because the attorneys involved here, neither Mr. Feldman or the attorneys on behalf of Michael Jackson, would do such a thing. I know all of them, and they're not only honorable, they're also intelligent, and they'd have enough sense not to do anything like this, because they do know what the law is.
All right, let me be the cynic then, and just suggest to you that all of that is implied.
Well, Ted,
doesn't have to be said.
Let me jump in.
Go ahead, Mr. Feldman.
Let me jump in and say that I think you're really putting the cart before the horse. The district attorney has not indicted, unless you know of something that I don't know. The question becomes if the district attorney's going to indict, when the district attorney's going to indict, and what kind of evidence the district attorney has. I'd like to know one parent in America that would let their child testify without some reasonable assurance of a conviction. And so far, we don't even have the first step, which is an indictment. And I think it's unfair to suggest that this child won't testify. The question becomes, can the district attorney convict Michael Jackson? Every psychiatrist that has seen this boy has said overwhelmingly that the best thing for this boy is to get it behind him. Now, if the district attorney gets around to something 2 years from now, would it be fair to say to this boy, you must testify because the public demands it? So I think to be fair to this little boy who had enough courage to get where he's gotten, you ought to say is, let's just take it one day at a time. That's what good lawyers do. That's what smart people do. They don't try.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I'd like to hear from Ralph Felder, who has already expressed certain views regarding this decision today. We'll be back in a moment. invited Michael Jackson's attorneys to come on the broadcast, either or both of them. They did not respond. We are back with Larry Feldman, Ira Rhino, Raul Felder. Mr. Felder, during the break, you were expressing a little cynicism that I wish you'd share with the rest of us.
I didn't know you heard it, but I think if people out there must be asking themselves if Michael Jackson paid millions of dollars and didn't know whether this boy was going to keep silent or not, then you got to believe in the tooth fairy also. I mean, it's a little hard to swallow, but Mr. Feldman said it, so we accept him at his word. But I also believe that the fact that the district attorney said they aren't going to indict the father or press charge against the father for extortion was not an unconnected event with the settlement. I mean, that allowed the father then to get money out of the settlement, it seems to me. Yet 2 days later, you get the settlement. I don't think this leaves a very good taste in anybody's mouth. On the one hand, with the highest respect for Mr. Feldman, because he has a brief. His brief is very simple: get as much money for his client as possible. I think he did his best to publicize this thing and to put as much pressure on Mr. Jackson as possible. And then we see everybody, of course, grieving and saying that, listen, this child ought to be protected, and psychiatrists say that the child shouldn't be exposed. Well, where were these psychiatrists for the last 3 months? Many questions here.
You know, Mr. Felder, I mean, I really think this is somewhat unbelievable for a lawyer. You know that, A, you don't traipse out psychiatrists in public. That's something in a trial. Number two, if I'm not mistaken, weren't you on the Geraldo show sensationalizing this case? And
wait a second. I don't represent... Mr. Feldman, I don't represent this young man, and I didn't come in front of the public today and say, listen, we're putting this away because this young man is suffering enough. But I was not the one responsible for having depositions, for dragging it out in the newspaper, something.
No, but
I don't
you're the one
fault
that
you.
tried...
Please, I don't fault you for any of that. That's
well, I
your
would hope
brief.
not.
That's what you're supposed to do, but it's a little tough to swallow that the same guy was doing that is saying today, hey, listen, I want to bury it because we got business to get on with their lives. Yeah.
And it's a little hard for me to swallow that someone who went on television to sensationalize this whole case when there's a little minor involved has some cynicism about what took place. I tell you, sir, what I said happens to be the truth. And I also tell you that it's tough for a little boy who has to live in this community to see teasers on the channel that Geraldo's playing, that they're going to decide on no evidence, not knowing anything about this case, whether Michael's guilty or not, and then he goes to school the next day and has to face his friends about his credo. That's a tough thing for a little kid.
Mr. Feldman, you're like the fellow who kills his parents and complains he's an orphan. I mean, you started the ball rolling. Now, there's a very simple question out there. Is the boy going to testify or not? You certainly know that. You're his lawyer. Not suppose in a year, suppose in 6 months. You know very well if he's going to testify. Why not say it, yes or no?
Is there going to be an indictment? Do you know that?
I don't know it, but let's add, if there is an indictment, will the boy testify? Very simple.
Gentlemen, let me jump in for a moment and just raise with whoever would like to address the issue. All of the assumptions are that because a great deal of money has been paid, and we don't know precisely how much, that therefore that in and of itself is evidence of Mr. Jackson's guilt. Let me turn it around. Having seen how much money can be extracted, what is to prevent a whole bunch of other people now from coming along, making similar charges? This could be a regular money-making machine, couldn't it?
Well, Ted, the question is how much of a career is left to salvage, and are their cases credible? This case, as the public read the papers, seemed to be building up and be more and more credible, and so there was a very good reason to try to hobble it and make it go away, and I think for lawyers, they did the right thing here. For their clients, not for public, not for public opinion, not for the cause of justice, but they had a very simple brief here.
I'm still concerned here that, you know, the general assumption seems to be one of guilt. Is that an assumption, Mr. Feldman, that you're happy with?
Well, Ted, I am very pleased with the result of this case. I couldn't be prouder of my client, and I couldn't be prouder of myself and the job that we did.
And the implication that is left, or the inference that most people are drawing from it, namely that Jackson is guilty, are you proud of that too?
That's not, you know, it's not my job to try to convince the public. If I went through the trial, I would have a job to convince 12 jurors. I represent a little boy who had a very courageous 6 months in his life and will never be the same as a result of it. And I don't think that it's my job to make those judgments. I think it's more for the media and commentators to decide what's right and what's wrong. I do have a sense, though, Ted, that there is thinking about mass media type of cases, that I don't know that jury verdicts per se change anyone's opinion. I don't know that anyone feels much different about the Menendez
Mr. Feldman,
cases.
forgive me, we are flat out of time, but I thank all three of you for joining us. Mr. Felder, Mr. Feldman, Mr. Reiner, good of you all to be with us. I'll be back in a moment.